Well, I definitely want to welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Rhonda Blackburn. I am the Senior Director for Academic Services and Client Success with Strut Learning. And again, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to talk all about gamification and CBE and how those work together. And I have an amazing presenter with me, Valary Oleinik, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Well, thank you, Rhonda. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you and all of our new friends. I love this. And I see they got their fingers warmed up. That's good. So basically, who am I? I have many roles, but what's most relevant today is I am a gamification speaker and consultant, and I have been in the gamification space for over a decade now, I would say. I'm trying to remember when the earliest stuff was. But I started out on the learning side, and so I was looking for ways to make things better for the learners because I have one of my favorite phrases. And if you could see the back of my laptop right now, I have a big sticker on it that says, "Learners deserve better." And so I was always looking for ways to make more effective, more engaging learning, and gamification is definitely one of my favorite ways to do that. So that's kind of the focus right now with a lot of the work I'm doing with education and different businesses and coaches and entrepreneurs and all kind of people. So that's why I'm here today.
Wonderful. Now y'all see why I invited her to our webinar today. So much good information. I've seen several of Valerie's presentations on gamification and others, and they're always amazing. So yeah, I actually come from academic background, been doing CBE and online for way too long. Um, Actually, not way too long. It's been a wonderful ride, right?
Right amount.
And so kind of getting us started. So, we're talking about gamification. So, what I would like you to do is kind of what is
What is it?
gamification?
What is it? And that is the good because we had the question already in the chat. Is it simulation? Is it the same thing? And I would say that the beauty of it is there is no one definition of it, which makes it both great and not so great. Because sometimes when we say gamification, an image pops into people's minds, and you can put in the chat if you want to what pops into your mind if you hear the word gamification, because there's four words in particular that I think always pop up. So I'm going to pause for a couple of seconds, see if anybody wants to give me. We have some experts in the chat, so this is a little bit of an unfair advantage for some of them. But there's four keywords, and some of them I would say really do apply, and some of them don't apply. And so it's kind of a 50-50 split. So the first one that usually pops up. Okay, here we go. We got some strategy and challenge and problem solving. These are excellent ones. These do definitely feed into the correct, I would say, or the way that I view gamification. So what I'm going to tell you is that for me, gamification is a process. It's not a product. So people get confused and they think, oh, you just want to make everything into a game. And nothing could be further from the truth. A lot of the stuff I've worked on looks nothing like a game. And that's not the point of gamification in my world. It's more, you're not making games. Gabe Zickerman once said, you're not making games, you're making games work for you. So it's looking at what is so powerful and engaging about a good video game or a good board game. What's special about it? Why do people want to play? And you've hit on so many of the words in the chat already. People like challenge. People like the problem solving. They like the competition. Nobody has ever come to me and said, "Oh my gosh, that was the best game ever. It had points and badges." Nobody says that, but that's what people start thinking of when they hear gamification. Like, "Oh, you're just doing points and badges and leaderboards," and that is, like, I would say, the low hanging fruit. That's kind of where things started, and how gamification really got a bad reputation in some places. It was a lot of people I've spoken to are like, oh, it's gimmicky. You're just trying to like trick people into playing a game. One person told me that it felt like they were learning to, let's say, scuba dive, and in the middle of it somebody went, here's some cotton candy, and I'm like, well, yeah, of course that would feel really icky. Like that would not be a good idea. So it's not about making games. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing. If I'm using games, am I gamifying things? And my answer would be yes. There are some purists in my community who would say absolutely not. Gamification is only when you take elements of games and apply them to a non-game context. Some people are very strict about how they use the word, and that's okay. I am fine with them saying that. That's their niche. But for me, because I come from the instructional design part, I'm more interested in how to leverage the power of the learning. So for me, I make it a big umbrella. So gamification can include anything from the playful design side of things and just kind of focusing on the aesthetics, focusing on giving it maybe a cohesive branding and theme and things like that can make a big difference. All the way over to the original question of, is it a simulation? Yes. Simulations, I would say, fall under the umbrella of serious games and simulations and all that would be on the farther extreme of, it's very much a game. It's very game like, can be very complex. Think about, the US Army, one of the most famous users of games and gamification and things like that. So I think it encompasses all of those things. And I think it gets challenging because we are all kind of speaking slightly different languages when we say we're going to gamify something. So I think that is part of it. So I often talk about it more in terms of what it's not, that it's not just games, that it is not a thing. Like a game is a thing I can point to, it's a product. But gamification is the thought process, it's the design process, it's how we put all of these things together. So that's kind of I think of it as, I guess the shortest answer I could give you would be, it's augmented instructional design. So you're kind of just like leveling up your good design that all of you are already doing, whether you're using CBE or any type of, whatever type of instructional methodologies you're using. So
So, since you brought up CBE, um, one of the things that, when we put CBE together, it's, obviously starting with those competencies, right? And then those skill levels. So, how do you see CBE and gamification fitting together in that way?
yeah, I think, to me they're the perfect match in terms of my idea that if we think of gamification as not an overlay, it's not like we're just putting a pretty package together, but if you think about it in terms of so many of the things that make for a powerful gameful experience, some of my favorite things would be choice, showing progress, challenges, all these things that people have already started to mention. There's some others that could fall into CBE but aren't necessary, like use of story, things like that. So much of it is based on, if you look at a well-designed game, think about it. It's very clear what the rules are. There's a desired outcome. There's a winning, perhaps, depending on the game. But there's definite, very clear things. If you play certain video games, for example, they often have either a list of objectives right there on the screen, and you can like pick, like, oh, I'm going to work on this one right now. This one's more important to me right now than that one. Sometimes it's a linear thing, sometimes it's not a linear thing. So again, this sort of idea of mixing and matching and making your own pathway, but where it really becomes super powerful often is where you're making the progress visible. Um, Teresa Mabile wrote a book some years ago now called The Progress Principle. And that's what she found in the workplace. The thing that distinguished, it wasn't that everybody wanted to have a great, I mean, everybody would love to have a great day every day, but we know that like some days are harder than others. But what she found with thousands of interviews and different places was that if people could see they were making meaningful progress, they were more productive, they were happier, they were all those things that you want people to be. And so and it is. I mean, I've seen it just in like so many different settings that, that's another one of my big things. I'm always like putting like posters up. I feel like, make progress visible. Because when you do that, magical things happen. People can understand where they are. Because I think one of the reasons that people drop out of a lot of trainings uh, is they get lost. People say, oh, they're not motivated. And motivation is obviously one of the other key words that I hear when people say, oh, I want some gamification. My people just aren't motivated. And what they mean is they're not motivated to do what you want them to do, because that's really kind of the message that if you if we're honest about what we're saying. Um, but people get confused. They think people are just not motivated. And a lot of times, if you really dig into it, you find out that the person got stuck. And think about anything you've done in life where, it was hard and maybe you didn't have the proper support, or you didn't know who to ask, or you were a little ashamed to ask, or whatever the situation was. But the longer you sat in that stuck state, it's hard to get going again. And so I see that, and that's one of the reasons I love choice so much. Sometimes if you can give people sort of that detour, if you think of it as sort of we're on a road trip, and maybe the highway's blocked up right now and you're just not going anywhere. If you see that there's sort of this alternate pathway, then you can keep people moving. And if you keep people moving, then they're more likely to stay engaged, and you have a better chance of them continuing and having success, because then they'll start to see those little successes. And gamification is really good at pairing with CBE and things like that, because one of the things it encourages you to do is make that pathway clear, give
Mhm.
people some alternatives, but also remind people of where they've been. And I think that's something we don't design into learning enough. We're kind of always on this like forward journey, like scaffolding. People think about as like this like step, and you just keep going, and or a steep line, and then we kind of forget that it's okay in games. You might notice if anybody's ever played, and we're friends, we can admit things. If you've played a game like Candy Crush or any of those, just on your phone, little sort of mobile games, there's certain levels that are super duper hard, and they're designed that way. They are super hard, but they always do two things. They show you a path forward. So if you don't play in a certain amount of time, it starts blinking at you and it goes, hey, try this, try this. It's never the right answer, or almost never the right answer, but it keeps you moving. And so then you're like, oh, and then you lose the round, but you're like, "Ugh, I was so close. I'm going to try again." And so it keeps you in motion. That's one little trick that they do in there. The other thing they do that we could really leverage in learning is when you finish that really hard level, there's usually a really easy level right after it, because they want you to breathe. There's a pacing to things. It's not a straight line, it's a wave. And so it's like, oh, we climbed. This was really, really, really hard. I'm really tired. I'm really tired. And then you settle in and you play that next round and you're like, oh, wow. So, like, think about, I know Rhonda has experience in math. Many people struggle in math. So, what if instead of all the problems keep getting harder and harder and harder, maybe on the next test, you throw in a couple of easier questions from the first test to remind people that, and two things will happen. Either it'll remind them that, oh yeah, I overcame that challenge. Now that's not so hard. So, okay, I'm getting better at this. Or it's going to be a spaced repetition issue where, oh, I forgot about that. And now I'm going to go back and remember that. So, I mean, I think these are the kind of things that, um, when I deconstruct a lot of games, I play games and then we talk about, one of the classes I do, we actually break them apart and we go, okay, why did this work? Why did this not work? Where could we use that concept? Not that I'm going to, again, make it necessarily a game, but can I take something out of that experience? I had one, it was interesting, one we played in one session. I didn't realize that on certain devices, it didn't let you rotate the game. Like you had to play it in portrait. And people were sitting there with these iPads and they're like, I don't like this. I don't like this experience. And so it kind of triggered that notion of, oh, wow, yeah, we have to think about what the user experience is going to be with whatever we're putting out there. Because sometimes we think we have the perfect content and we have the perfect structure and everything, but we kind of miss that step. And I think that's something else gamification brings to the conversation, is sort of having a process that brings you back and says, okay, you did the smarty part, you did the, the pedagogy part, but like, let's now look at it from the participant's experience and what that's going to be like. So that's a few things I think.
That's I love that. And one of the things that, kind of taking you back to, um, progress is visible to the person, right? But it's not just progress, it's all pieces of the puzzle, right? And so it's not just, oh, I've done this, but this is also where I need to go. But this is another piece that I need to do. So you could actually see the whole picture at one time,
Mhm.
and being able to do that, because that is very, very competency based education, right? I mean, it's very CBE, and by laying on top of that something that allows for that movement, in a almost like a playful, right? I mean, being able to have someone enjoy. I mean, we always tell. I mean, I have a 12-year-old. The whole time that she's gone through school, I've told her learning is fun. If it's not fun, let's make it fun, right?
Mhm. Oh yeah.
And so when she wasn't having fun with science, we would try to figure out how to bring it to life. And
Yeah.
I think that's another thing that both CBE and gamification has in common, is this idea of bringing things to that are real, that, taking it and making it personal and owning it and seeing it in either your place of work or your where you're going to school or just your life in general. Um, can you talk a little bit about how you kind of meld those together as you're putting together? I know
Meld
you've
it
done this
all
a lot.
together. Meld it all together. No, those are I agree with everything you just said. Absolutely, absolutely agree. And that's why, to your point of being able to see everything, you'll see in a lot of games and a lot of gameful designs. In fact, you're going to see things like maps, because it does a couple of things. It gives you that sort of, bird's eye view of the landscape and where you're going and been and all those things and the possibilities. So sometimes you'll see even like where it'll be like, these are the things you've done and here's a few of the things you could do, but some of it's kind of clouded over. You might have seen those in games. It's kind of like you're not quite sure. There's some other, a little mystery, a little curiosity. You're kind of driving that. So again, it's that you've got the whole CBE plan. Like, we know what that looks like. We can make the flow charts and we can make all the grids and things. And then it is, as you said, it's kind of the like, how do we like, like I said, augment this? How do you bring it to life? Because it also, what it does is it immerses you more in the learning, because now you're kind of in this world of possibilities and where you can go and all of that. But as far as how to meld it all together, um, I would say one of the ways I do it, I do have a sort of plan I use with people. It's a very loose plan, um, but it's got four parts because I think it kind of gets you in the right mindset to address the different things. And we've talked a little bit about the first one, so it's I call game plan. So because it's easy to remember, because I'm a simple girl. So the G is for goals, and we'll talk about each one, but it's goals, audience, mechanics, and experience are the four pieces. It's not a linear process. It's just four words that help me to keep people on track. So the goal piece, to your point, is the CBE. You've already figured out the pathways. You've already figured out what's necessary to get the person from point A to point B. But when I'm talking about goals, I'm talking about, why are we applying the gamification? What is it that we need? Where are people having trouble? Is it that they're having trouble staying on track? Is it that they don't have enough social opportunities within the structure we have? Because sometimes when we modularize things so much, that does get to be a problem, where how do we now have people interact with one another? So the goals I'm talking about take the learning objectives and all of that into account, but more thinking about the bigger picture, as we said. So, how are we going to, what are the goals of the gamification of this? Why am I doing it? Because if somebody comes to me and says, I want to gamify something to make it more fun, it's a red flag to me. That means there's a problem in their design usually, because as you said, if it's not fun, let's figure out how to make it fun and what's not fun about it, because learning is fun. We as humans, we love to learn. We love to, I mean, babies learn a gazillion things in their first year. Humans are built to learn stuff, so that part's not usually the problem. It's usually something about how it's being presented to them that is making it not fun. Which is it's a great, there's a quote Edward Deasy said in one of his books. He's one of the two professors that came up with self-determination theory, and he says basically, um, instead of, say, I'm paraphrasing, but instead of saying like, how do I motivate somebody, he suggests, how do we look at creating environments where people will be motivated? So again, to that idea that sometimes it's just not fun because we need to tweak the environment a little bit. So anyway, so we have the goals piece because that's where a lot of people fail. They're just not clear on why they're doing it. They're just like, oh, we added a game to it. We made it fun. And then they're surprised when they don't get the results they're anticipating because they didn't really have a clear picture of their goals of the process. The next is the audience piece, and that's what we talked about a minute ago. That sometimes we forget to flip it. We talk about being learner centered. I know we talk about it, but sometimes reality doesn't quite match up with that. And that too is probably the second biggest place that I've seen gamification systems fail. Is they just did not take into account. I say not just know your audience, but respect your audience. And if you're just designing things that you like or you think are going to be great, and you haven't talked to them, you haven't kind of played it out with them, play tested some things. Um, and I know that's not always possible in every environment, but as much as possible, if you can get that information about the audience and what would motivate them, what wouldn't motivate them, it will make a huge difference. This especially gets into things like if you're building reward structures into your package. I've seen a lot of those, like CBE. Maybe if you've completed this many competencies, you get X, you get some prize, you get a reward. And then the problem there is that reward in alignment with the goals that the person has? There's a famous example where a woman, a single mother, was going through a management training program. And obviously, she was going through the program because she wanted to advance in her career. And she wanted to advance in her career in part because she had children that she was supporting. So her motivations were very family and very, she had a lot of intrinsic motivation about it. She wanted money, but not for the sake of money. And the prize when she finished this program was she got to go for this weekend retreat at like a country club or something, which I'm sure was lovely, but weekends were family time. And then she felt like, if I don't go, I'm gonna not get the promotion. I'm gonna be down the people that go are gonna get more face time and they're gonna be top of the list. And so again, these ideas of making the rewards meaningful and making the process meaningful for people. So have to be careful about that, about knowing your audience. So then the mechanics piece, that's where we put it all together. So it's not just game mechanics, but all the things we're talking about. Putting together your design. What are the modules they need to do? What is the whole game plan? I think about it like, we're building a learning engine and I'm the mechanic, and like, what are all the pieces I need? But not just what are the pieces, but you know how a mechanic is, they know how to like just adjust it. Like if I just turn this nut just a little bit, the carburetor works this way. Or if it sounds funny because I need to tighten this or whatever. That's what I'm talking about with mechanics, is we really have to pay a lot of attention to how we put it all together. To make sure that it's serving that audience for those goals. And this is how it all kind of stays cohesive. Because
So, and I
sometimes we
think
come up with
that's
cool ideas, but they're just not in alignment.
yeah, I think that is also where that works really well with CBE, right? Because CBE many times is self-paced, so people can go at the speed of what they know, what are their, the competencies that they have already achieved in life, and so they
Yep.
can kind of get through that. But the other part, kind of referring to strut a little bit, we actually do have when we talked about the visibility of like that path and where they're going, we have something called product, or a lot of people have turned that into pathway, um, to where you could actually see what's coming next and what that looks like. And are you going to get certifications along the way, or badges or anything like that? So you can see what the culmination of it is, and what those are, at least at a bigger technical level, right? And so being able to, but I love that mechanic piece of how can you put that together in a way that helps your audience? Because honestly, when we get into professional development, we get into workplace, we get into adult learning, most of those people have lives, even if it's a family or if it's just work or whatever it is, and they need to figure out how they're going to put in this learning piece, right? And if that is a certification, or if that's a master's degree, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
So I love that
absolutely.
piece of being able to kind of pull those together.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned, how Strut does it. Like, no, that's always one of the things I suggest to people. Like, go look and see what your tool has available to you, because sometimes you can find a feature that wasn't really intended to be part of the gamified thing, but it's how you use it. I mean, the biggest tool in gamification is creativity. It's not about any tool. It's not about, everybody has their own method of doing it, their own definitions. But really, as I said at the beginning, to me, it's all in the service of the learner. Like, is this going to make it more effective? Is this going to make it a more engaging experience? Like, I'm looking at the outcomes. So again, to me, that's the alignment right there, is that both, the CBE approach and the gamification approach, when it's done well, they're 100% aimed at getting to those outcomes for the individual and making it meaningful, making it meaningful to the individual, which is, again, I think that is one of the big challenges for designers when they first get started. We all have our preferences. We all have the way we're used to doing things. And we kind of stick with what we know because, okay, that worked. We're going to keep doing it, which has its advantages. But then it also sometimes, like, oh, but this is a different audience, and that's not going to work the same way for this audience as that audience. And you have to be super careful with that. I had a project I worked on years ago. Well, it wasn't really my project, but I was at the firm where it was happening. And it was an abysmal failure, I'm just going to say, because the people designing it would not listen to us when we said we have two very distinct populations of users here, and they are not going to react the same way to this idea you have. It's going to work for this group, and this group, it is not. It is not going to work. And sure enough, it did not. And a separate training had to be rewritten just for the second group. And then, of course, you had the added stress then of they were already angry because they had been through the first experience, which was not a good experience. Yeah, I can never stress enough for people. I'm like, really, if you have any chance to know your audience, like, respect that. Don't just go, everybody. When I hear somebody go, oh, everybody will love this course, I just like, I can feel I'm just, I'm sorry for you. This is going to go really badly for you at some point in your life. But anyway, because
And
that is good.
and Caroline just asked, could you give more details on that example?
The one that went really badly. Everybody loves the failure stories. I always love that. I don't mind telling. I assume that's, she can give me a thumbs up or another confirm. I assume that's what she meant, was the one that went really badly.
I think
What it
so.
was if not, I'll come back and tell you another story. I got plenty of stories.
Yes,
No, but
she said yes.
they this is why we love doing these. Um, well, what happened in this case was, it was, and this is going to sound almost really comical. It was phone training. It was teaching people how to use, um, like Cisco phones, desk phones, voice over IP. Uh, but the environment was what was challenging. So this was in a very large international law firm. So you had the one group, which were the attorneys, basically. And what does the attorney do with the phone? They answer it. They pick up the they pick it up and they answer it. Maybe make a call. Maybe, a few things. They're not using the phone in the same way as population 2, which were the legal secretaries. Now, at this point, these legal secretaries had up to 20 phone lines on their phones. So, yeah. So you can imagine telling somebody who is responsible for making sure they're not losing the phone calls and they're transferring and they're doing all of that for up to 12 was 12 is a fair number, even not too many had that many, but let's say 12. That's a lot of phone lines to keep track of, and each one of those phone lines actually has two lines because you can be on the phone and receive a second call. So this is a lot to manage while they're doing their work, mind you. That's not their entire job. They're not receptionists. So they were panicked going in that they were going to lose a call, they were going to hang up on a client, and we're talking multi-million dollar clients here. We're not, not that you want to hang up on anybody, but this was like high stress, high stakes. And they were being told on Monday, you were going to have a new phone at your desk and you need to make sure that you don't, screw up. So they were panicked. And what the people had designed was they're like, oh, it's going to be fun. We're going to make it superheroes. So they had a phone lab where people could go and Batman could call Superman and Wonder Woman could whatever. And so when they did the training, they were like this, it was sort of this, comic comic book sort of experience. And the assistants, and there's also a demographic issue here. The associates tending to be younger, the legal secretaries tending to be of an older population. Um, they did not want to play superheroes. They wanted to make sure they didn't hang up on somebody. And so the training was, they were just beyond angry and beyond frustrated because they felt like this just wasn't helping them and nobody understood how difficult their situation was. And they didn't have to change a whole lot of things, but it was the tone of it, it was the way it was presented, it was the sort of, in their perception, sort of making light of it, making light of this change that was a major change for them. So again, we can all go, oh, phone training, that doesn't sound horrible. But if you've ever sat at one of those desks and you've had all those phones and you're trying to figure that out and have people walking by and stopping, then you can kind of understand that in their environment, that was not the right approach to take. So that was really the thing. So it wasn't heavily gamified. It was more the aesthetics of it and more making it a playful experience, but it just went terribly, terribly wrong, um, because they didn't pay attention to the A. It didn't.
So that's interesting when with that example, and also just the idea of if you have truly two sets of clients, your audience, right?
Mhm.
That you could present almost the same material,
Mhm.
but maybe in two different ways.
Yep.
Maybe, you know, it sounds like that the legal secretaries didn't want any gamification on it. I mean, they're
No,
like,
no, no.
just straightforward, just tell me what it is, which I think is okay as well, right?
Mhm.
And then for the assistants or the associates, to be able to say, okay, we're going to have some fun with this, and we're going to show you how to do this in this way or whatever. So
Exactly.
it sounds like you could actually have different versions of
Yep.
the same kind of training or course.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it goes back to the whole choice thing. You could have even, um, uh, even if it was one course, having sort of the light version, it's kind of like, you're on the, express lane, or you need to take the full scenic
Yeah.
route. Like, you could structure it. But that's where it gets interesting, like depending on the technology, depending on your needs and everything. But yeah, the modules themselves could be exactly the same material. You could use the
Yeah.
same videos or handouts or whatever. It's just this group might only get the first three modules. That might be all they need, and they're good. And the other group just needs a more in-depth experience. And so then you would design that. And again, you could skin it different ways. Maybe one group doesn't want to see any of the, you know, fun stuff or whatever. Um, yeah, Carolyn, they did. They wanted they wanted to be respected for the situation they were in, and they wanted to have a serious. They wanted to sit down, as Rhonda said. They wanted somebody to sit down with them at the beginning, at least, and say, "Press this button. This will happen. Followed by this. This is what you should watch out for. These are the places where you might get yourself in trouble because this phone transfers calls slightly different than the phone you used to have, or this phone doesn't have the same speed dial list in the same place." Like they wanted, then once you got them past that, they might have been willing, and many of them would have been actually, would have been willing to be more playful with the practice part of it. But they were not willing to be playful with the learning part of it because it was too big of a shift to then add this other thing on top of it. And that again is why not everything in gamification has to be um so doesn't have to be completely, gamey and things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where when, you know, you think about kind of that roadmap any kind of map or the structure of it, it could be that, that transparency of, okay, the first part is really going to take you through. I mean, because even some of the associates probably could have learned a lot from that first part too, right? And so we're gonna take this in a two-step process. So they could have created the same training,
Yep.
but be more explicit with this part right here is probably a little bit more. This is what we need to go through, but
Mhm.
then we're going to get to this piece, and that's where you kind of put in the gamification. Kind of like
Yeah.
you said, you don't have to have gamification throughout
Yeah.
the whole.
Right. I mean, there's so many options. There's the sort of formative assessment options of maybe everybody doesn't need to do the whole thing, and or is it an
Mhm.
opportunity to, hey, you play this one little game, let's just say you played a little quick game and answered a couple of questions or did whatever. Maybe you don't need to see that part, or maybe you then it diverts you and says, "Hey, I think you might want to look at this and this, and somebody else might want to look at these things because maybe this person, does a lot of conference calls versus this person who has more people they're dealing with and are more about the line management or something like that." Um,
Yeah.
yeah, there's so many options, and also just the other thing about this sort of multiple pathway thing that's really powerful. If you do have a situation, even within CBE, if you have a situation where you're trying to keep people in sort of a cohort,
Mhm.
um, nobody moves at the same speed. And so what can tend to happen is you have those people who are kind of going along at, we'll call it the average speed, and then you have some people who really need some extra assistance with parts of it. So
Mhm.
they might need to kind of detour a little bit and do a little more remedial work on certain things. So that way, both groups can be benefiting by giving them that choice. And then the third group is always your group that is the speed demons. They're like, "I'm finishing it the first day. I'm done. I'm one day, I'm done." And they're speeding through it. But then that they're not having the full experience with the group. So if there's any
Right.
social pieces to it, like we were talking about earlier, if there's online discussions, like if somebody's just speeding through the module, they're like 5 chapters ahead of the people talking about what they're talking about in the discussion. So what you can do is you can use the alternate pathways to slow them down, to be speed bumps for them by saying, "Hey, you've already completed this so quickly. You've won. You've unlocked this additional content." So then you can let them go deeper on certain things or explore or just have a little fun. That would be a place where sometimes I've seen people successfully just kind of put in a little fun thing. Maybe it's a little fun video like, "Hey, if you finish the course in the next 48, if you finish this module within the next 48 hours, it sends them like a little funny video or something that also just kind of like, oh, okay, then it builds curiosity. Oh, well, if I finish early next time, what am I going to get kind of thing. So you can kind of play with, um, you know, helping to keep people participating more together. without forcing them into the I'm not unlocking the next content until everybody has finished this. And then half of the people are mad at you because they finished it on Monday and then they're just sitting there all week and not, and then they're not engaged with it for the whole week because they did their part and they're done. So
Yeah, and that's one of the things I do love about CBE and that kind of that self-paced model is
mhm.
that people can go because there are some
Yeah,
times that you're going to have content that I've been doing this for 50 years and I
exactly.
know it. Let me just get through it, right? And let me get to the piece that, oh, this is brand new. I've never done this piece before. And
Mhm.
so being able to keep them
Yep.
and it's engagement, right? Because you're getting them past the part that they already know and to the part that may be a little bit more exciting because they're learning something new. But
Yep.
it could also be the fact that, that's just they just need to get through it. They just, need to get to that next piece. And but understanding that, some people do like kind of that cohort model where,
Mhm.
people are going through something, but
Yeah.
by giving them those extra perks, right? Because they did something, makes them feel special, I'm sure, and also gives them extra information. Because it could be that I went through this really quick because I've been doing this for years, but maybe there's one little piece that's brand new that just came out and they
Exactly.
can get into that faster. So,
Exactly. And yeah, and so that's where you can leverage the you can leverage those engagement points of yes, maybe it's I want additional content because I already know this, but there's some new stuff you don't know. Or maybe it's not even additional content. Maybe it's what I've seen done a lot of times is it gets you access to something. So maybe like we've done, I know several firms that like, oh, the new computers are coming out, the new technology is coming out, and you don't get your new laptop until you have completed some module. So maybe if you complete some extra thing, you get a new wireless mouse with it, or you get like you level up your experience. So
right.
again, that's the beauty of this. It's like if you sort of adopt this gameful mindset, you're always looking for how do I make this a little better? Like what would make this experience? And that is the E in game plan is experience. What would make this experience better? Because maybe we've got all the right pieces and everything's cool. But you want to make it a memorable experience, not just of them memorizing or the content being memorable, but you're always, or I'm always at least, one of my unwritten learning objectives in all my courses is I want to make people more prepared to take the next class. So that might be learning to use the technology more easily. It might be there's those side pieces to every learning experience. It might be encouraging them to start sharing their experience with their community more. Making them more prepared for the next learning experience and making them want to participate in the next learning experience. So that's where I think um, some of these little gameful things, surprise and delight is big. If you can kind of surprise people a little bit with something, and again, that doesn't have to be a prize. It can be, like I said, it could be content. It can be just a little. Sometimes it's as simple as, you finish a module and something pops up with a fun picture or something that, like, a GIF or something, that gives them a high five. Or it can be. It doesn't have to be a major ordeal, but it's the thought process of going into what's that experience like for somebody on the other end. They finish something. Um, the celebration. We don't always build in the little celebrations along the way.
Mhm.
I had the chance to hear the Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield. I was total fangirl, total geek moment. But he was a keynote at a conference I went to a couple of years ago, and that was one of the things he talked about. Like, I mean, think about the most stressful environment you can think of. You're working in space. One false move and you're, you know,
Um,
um, so it's kind of a stressful job. And but he talked about with all the different teams he worked with, he said, "Don't wait till the end to celebrate." That was one of his things. And that again, that's a very gameful sort of and that's a CBE thing. That's like you're getting
Mhm.
feedback. It's like it's the feedback loop. It's, being intentional and finding those opportunities And again, I do gamification different than a lot of people, but for me, that's where the power for learning is, anytime I can find somewhere that people get that little smile, they get that little excitement, they get that interest in, get them into the next loop. So anyway, so yeah,
I don't know, Caroline. I'd like to get a congratulations from Big Bird. I think that'd be pretty cool.
I would not mind. I would not mind a congratulations from Big Bird. But whatever works for you. That might, hey, if you're on Sesame Street, that might be the best. That might be the best thing ever. I don't know. Um, but again, that's you have to know what your culture of your group of your organization is like.
And
What's the
sometimes
feeling?
that's easier, like in a corporate setting or things like that, compared to like an academic setting,
Mm,
right? Sometimes it's a little harder to know to a certain degree what students may be coming in, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But again, as long as it's kept, a couple of the most successful ones I've seen are in academic settings. There's a really great course. It's no longer on um, edX or Coursera, but it was an English Gothic literature course out of Brown University. And it was a tenured professor who basically said, I'm tenured. What the heck can they do to me? I'm going to do something different. And he went and found himself an amazing instructional designer who built this gamified system. And so it was about exploring what it means to be human. And so all these things we talked about, there was a map and they visited the different realms, and each realm was one of the pieces of literature. And, they went through the whole process, and it was an amazingly successful course. And one of the interesting things was, to your point of you don't always know who you're going to get. They they had sort of a learner persona they had built. They knew typically some of the populations that take the class, and so they had really focused on that. And then after the first semester of running the course, they looked at it again, and they had this population that they did not expect, which was I think it was the football team, because the class was taught at a time that worked well with the schedule of the team. And so they had this sort of outsider population they hadn't accounted for, but it still ended up working for them. It wasn't, there was nothing about the design they had done. And in the course, they did a lot of things like giving people choice. They had one activity in each module that was sort of the more traditional, read something, write a little response or something. And then they would have one option that was perhaps a little more on the creative side, like pushing the boundaries a little bit and things like that. So I've seen that. I've seen pharmacology. I've seen people do two things in pharmacology. One is using even Kahoot or something like that in med school is huge because there's so much retention information that they have to review constantly. So there's little quick game type things people like. They actually that medical students really responded well to that. Another was teaching the process that drugs go through the drug trial process. And she did the entire course as a live action role play. So they were broken up into teams, and there was a finance person and a research person and whatever on each team, and they were all competing to get their drug approved. So sometimes wrapping up the content. So again, same content that you would use under. They still had to read the same research papers and do all that stuff. She did get in a little trouble because she didn't give like a traditional written exam, but um, hopefully that got worked out. So,
yeah, yeah. One of the things that when I think about the courses that I design is that I love the idea of choice, and so when I'm like, okay, for you need to do this. One of them is I have my students actually have to truly implement a technology by aligning it to the mission and the vision and the goals of the organization, and then talk about the process that they're going to do and all of that. But they can do it any way they want. They don't have to give it to me in a paper. They can give it to me in a video. They can give
yeah,
it to me in a PowerPoint. They can give it to me in mind map, if that
Mhm.
is how they want to pull it together, so as long as I get all the information, I could understand where they're going and what they're doing, it's they could be as creative as they want,
Yeah, I love
so.
that. Yeah, I love that, and especially when you're dealing with non-traditional students. I mean, if
Mhm,
somebody's not going, I've kind of had this debate with people. If somebody's not going into academia, like they don't want to follow a, they don't want to be professors, they don't want to be researchers. They're in school because they're trying to learn what they need to learn to go do whatever job it is they want to do. Um, Taking some of that stress off, particularly students where English is not a first language. To me, that is so much extra cognitive load asking them to do everything in perfect APA, MLA, whatever their topic, whatever their field is. Like doing that is like so stressful on top of they're translating everything in their heads and they're trying to learn whatever the topic. We haven't even gotten to like learning the actual material. I'm like, these are a lot of extra hurdles you're adding on top of people, or, yeah, somebody who's a working, is working and is doing this, evenings and weekends and, what is the goal that we're trying to get to? What is the person's goal? Um,
mhm.
and I'm pro learner. I'm like, go learners.
Definitely. No, I love that, being able to, you know, figure out different ways of getting the learner through material in a way that, it keeps them motivated, but it also it's I think it could be it's more than that. It's really being able to take that content, own it, and then put something together that is meaningful to you. So if that's where you work or in your personal life or whatever it is, to be
Exactly.
able to then turn it in and get feedback on what it is that you just put together. And I've had so many students that have come to me and have been like, what we just put together, I took that to my boss and we are now with that proposal, we're now moving forward. And it's like,
Yes.
that's what I love to hear,
Win.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, and again, that just goes to, what's the meaning of why we're doing this, and what our goals. There's like I always say there's the institution's goals, whether it's a company, a school, whatever. And then there's like the learning objective goals of whatever the topic is. And then there's the individual's goals, and we shouldn't diminish that because that's where the emotional connection comes from, and that's
Mhm,
where you get a lot of uh, benefit to the whole thing. Yeah, there's a lot of great examples out there in the world of where people took just a little some just a little change and it just made it meaningful to
mhm,
the Europe. One of my favorites was like I think it was Sweden started it, but several European countries have done it now. Like when you would go to donate blood, not something that people necessarily like get up in the morning and go, "Hey, I think I'll go," unless there's an
right,
emergency. But like there's obviously an ongoing need. And so the blood banks were struggling and they realized that part of the problem was people felt good when they went and gave blood. You feel like you did a good thing. Unless you hate needles, then you don't deal with that. But people generally had a very good feeling about it. They were doing it because they wanted to help. But then that was it. Like there was no follow through. So they simply started texting people when the blood was used. They don't give it, you're not giving out any information about anybody. It was just, we want to let you know that your contribution, like today, saved a life. Like it was used um, at a hospital. They might have given some generic information. And suddenly they had more people coming and giving blood because now they made it even more meaningful to people because now people were reminded of the good thing they did. And again, it goes back to some of the stuff we talked about earlier. It's like sometimes we have to remind people, like we're all busy and we don't remember everything and but then it makes it personal, it makes it
mhm.
meaningful, and that's one of those little golden spots that if you just and that how much is that a text message like that's not it's not a big deal, like, and
Yeah,
I'm sure it was automated. Like, it's not a big deal, but it was a big deal to the people that got the messages and a bigger deal to the people who got the actual blood. So, just
exactly. Well,
little
and
things.
that is, just thinking about CBE, that is so CBE, right? It's like, how can you make learning personal and make learning, meaningful to as you're going through it. And because, with that, you're building skills, you're building competencies that are going towards something. And, you know, hopefully that the way you're doing it is very meaningful. And obviously there's always a reason behind why we're doing it, right? So,
Yeah.
um, well, we have a few more minutes, and I just want to make sure that anyone that is attending has any questions. We can definitely take those. Um, but I don't know if there are any final thoughts, Valerie, that you would like to leave us with on the thought of gamifications and CBE while people may be typing in.
I would just one of my final mantras is always think big and start small. I think people get hesitant. They feel like they have to know everything about gamification, or they feel like they have to gamify everything all at once, and that's not true. You can start incredibly small with one little idea. Yes, I would be happy to break down game plan. It is goals, audience. I'm going to type it even. Here we go. Goals, audience, and if here's my little gift to everybody if they want it. Um, I should have just created a link, but I will admit I did not. Um, I have a gamification starter kit document that I will send you if you want. I will put my email in, and anybody who wants it, send me a hey, send me a hi, and I'll yeah.
And
There's
definitely,
the
if
pieces of the
anyone,
goal plan.
excellent. And if anyone is interested in exploring the idea of CBE with gamification or just CBE, you can always reach out to um, me, and I will definitely love to talk to you about what does that mean. And I think so. You put down for Pamela the best way to contact you.
Yeah, or you can just
Yes.
follow me on LinkedIn. I'm the only weirdly spelled Valerie on there, so it makes it easy to find me. I'm easy
Well,
to
and
find.
everyone does, should get an email in about a week or so with the recording here. And so you can share or you can watch it again. Um, but I definitely want to thank Valerie for joining me today on this quest to pull together CBE and gamification. And thank you so much for all of your wisdom and advice for everyone that's here.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Everyone have a great day. Thank you.